This demonstration is going to cover the creation of tasks in ArcGIS Pro. We're going to pick up where we left off from the last demonstration, which covered tasks from an end user perspective. So we're just kind of picking up where we left off with that. You can see in this particular example, we've already started working with the editing parcels task item. And then from there, we drilled down into editing parcel geometry, and then selecting or splitting a parcel into two parts. And so from a design perspective, anytime you're creating a task, each task is going to be a series of steps. Those steps hopefully will have been defined in your planning process, and for each step, you will need to define what should happen at each step and guide the end user through how to complete each of those steps so that they ultimately arrive at the completion of some type of geoprocessing task. So you can see for this particular task, splitting a parcel into two parts, there's actually 6 or 5 steps. The first step is making parcels the only selectable layer. Now, when you are in Task Designer mode on the right-hand side of your screen, and sometimes it makes sense just to kind of move this over a bit so that you can see them side by side. So in the Task Designer, you'll see that there are 4 tabs across the top: General, Actions, Views, and Contents. General is where you define the name of the step. A tooltip, if you need to, that's optional. There are 2 sets of instructions for each step. The first set of instructions is what guides the end user as to how to complete the step. So it's just going to be textual information and guide the end user through the completion of the step. Run proceed instructions are given to the end user to help them define how to move to the next step once they've completed this step. And then down at the bottom is the step behavior, right? And that can be manual, auto run, auto proceed, and automatic. With a manual step behavior, this is a completely manual step, so the end user has to do all the work here. So they do something and then they click buttons to proceed on to the next step. This particular step is automatic, which means the step runs and the step proceeds, so that the end user doesn't actually have to do anything at all for this particular step. And in fact, it's been hidden using the checkbox. So when you have an automated step like this, the end user doesn't have to do anything to complete that particular step. Now you could have put this step and required the end user to do this, right? When you're making parcels the only selectable layer, you could have provided instructions here that told them to go to the contents pane and click on list by selection and make sure that parcels are the only selectable layer. But a lot of times it makes sense to do some of the work for the end user so they can focus on other parts of the task. And it also comes into play when you have end users that are not necessarily what you would think of as power users with ArcGIS Pro. So rather than worrying about them trying to find a particular tab or button, sometimes we just do things for them just to make things easier, and which is what we've done here. These 2-step behaviors in the middle, auto run and auto proceed, these are semi-automation. So with these semi-automated steps, part of it requires interaction from the end user, part of it is automated, and the ordering of that changes a little bit depending upon whether you're doing auto run or auto proceed. Now for each step, you're going to have to go through these 4 tabs. So you would then go to Actions. In this case, because it's an automated step, I don't really need to do anything. So we leave the command or geoprocessing tool empty or none. You then go to Views. Views is where you define what map or layout should be open and active. You can have multiple. In this particular example, this particular project only has 1 map and doesn't have any layouts. But all your maps and layouts that are part of a project will show up here, and it'll be up to you to define which of those maps or layouts is active and which of those maps are open. You can only have 1 map or layout active at a time, but multiple maps and layouts can be active at the same time. You'll notice that there's a little checkbox here. If you click this button, checkbox item, well, in this case it doesn't matter, but you'll notice that you can change these normally to X them out or to a dash. So there we go. I like it opened up. So a check mark means to open the view if it's not already open. An X means to close the view if it is currently open, and then a dash leaves the state as is right now. Now, right now, I only have 1 entity, right, 1 map, so that naturally makes it that it's going to be the active and open map. And from there, you'll go to contents. The contents is going to be based on the current active map or layout. And so when you get to the contents pane, what you'll see is a listing of all the layers that are part of that map. And then you have the ability to define which layers are visible, selectable, editable, snappable. You can also define the selected layer table and labeling, control labeling from here as well. So again, you'll see dashes, check marks, and X's. And from here, you can just simply click on these items. If you leave it as a dash, then it's going to leave the current status as is, right? So in other words, whatever the current state of city limits, streets, parcels, and topographic, it simply leaves their state. So if they're visible, it leaves them visible. If they are turned off, right, then it leaves it in that state. An X next to an item indicates that we're going to make sure that that layer is turned off for whatever it is that we're wanting to enforce. And then the check mark ensures that for that particular layer, we're going to turn that on, in this case, selectability. Right, so all of these, you can click through all of these and change their properties as needed. Right, so you can go through those 4 steps each time. So once you're done step 1, you then go to step 2, find the name, tooltip, instructions. Again, instructions are telling the user what to do to complete this step. Run proceed instructions tell the user how to move to the next step. You see that this one is auto run, so it's a semi-automated step. Here you're selecting the parcel to be split. So that requires something that it requires something of the end user, right? So in this case, you're requiring the user to select a parcel to be split. And then when you split it, then it can kind of move on to the next step. So it's a semi-automated type of step. Its actions include rectangle. Now, what you can define here is you can define a specific command, specific geoprocessing tool, or you can simply reset it. The first button is the record button. And what the record button does is it basically, once you click it, you'll see that my cursor has changed. What it does is it's essentially following you around on the interface, waiting for you to click a button. So right now, rectangle, select by rectangle is the selected action, but maybe you want to change that to a polygon, for example. So if you click on polygon, you'll notice that then changes to polygon. So this record button is just kind of following you around to see what you're going to click, and then it selects it, puts it there. So what you're doing there is you're ensuring that when the user gets to this step where they're selecting the parcel to be split, that the select by rectangle tool is automatically activated. So in other words, we're again helping the end user rather than trying to get them to figure out where that select by rectangle tool is. We simply select it for them so that they don't have to worry about that step. Now you can also select the edit button, and that will display a set of commands or geoprocessing tools. So this would allow you to embed a geoprocessing tool for that step or a command, right? And so if we go to the split parcel tool, that particular step requires the split tool. So what we've done there is we've embedded the split tool inside that step. And so again, we're making things easier for the end user. We don't require them to go out to the modify features pane and find the split tool. We simply embed it at that location for this particular step, and we're making things much easier for the end user in terms of having to find things. But again, for each of these steps, you're just going to go through these, define all these different items in terms of views, contents, and whatever else that you want to define. And you just go through each of these steps, right? And you're doing the same thing here with each of these steps, with the end goal being that you are pre-configuring a set of steps whose goal it is to ultimately be able to accomplish some type of geoprocessing routine. All right, and then you can add additional steps as well here. There's some buttons across the top here that will allow you to do things like add new steps. You can delete steps. You can record commands as they're occurring in the interface. So you do have a lot of options here for adding to your tasks, removing from tasks, altering tasks in different ways. But again, this is from a design perspective. Ultimately, you're going to give this to some end user, right? Whether you're the end user or somebody else in your organization is the end user. You want to try to make this as straightforward as possible for the end user, and depending upon their knowledge or skill level, you want to try to make things easier for them as well. All right, that's all I needed to cover for this demonstration. Appreciate you joining me, and we'll see you next time.